Ladies and gentlemen, NFL Week 12 is in the books. That means your boy is here to talk about it.
Fasten your seatbelts for the realest Eagles and Sixers YouTuber! One who plays no clickbait and gets to the point! The myth, the legend, Nicky Steves! Come to my channel, you know the deal. Yo, boy, always keeps things real. I'm simply statue, think this slate, dropping unrealistic mags, 2K takes for the clip. Even though cats like that get views closer to the milli, never hear me preach, look on to Philly. Before you watch the Eagles all the way through the early 22, authentic talk, forget what others do. Come to my channel, you know the deal. Yo, boy, always keeps things real. The 24/7, 365 way. Sports content for the reals to fill the day.
Happy Tuesday afternoon, folks. It's your boy Nicky Steves here. The NFL Week 12 is in the books. Let's talk about it. We got a lot to talk about for this one. Let's get into it. Everyone that stopped by, as always, thanks for stopping by. We're doing this on my channel, the Hardcore Sports Network. So shout out to them for it. Now, let's dive right into it. We're going to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers falling to the Cleveland Browns in a surprise snowy Thursday night game. We all went into this matchup. We all thought that the Steelers were going to win this game. Let's face it. In the pick'ems pool we did, and the majority had the Steelers. It only made sense on paper, but in a surprise contest, the Browns upset the Steelers. But to me, this was more of a sloppy game from the Steelers than it was a good game for the Browns, because when you look at what happened throughout the game, you saw the Steelers in the first half particularly shot themselves in the foot numerous times. Going for it on fourth down numerous times and failing to convert. A fumble on a sack by Wilson. Now, the Steelers did start to get it together in the second half. They scored on 3 of their final 4 drives, but by the time they got momentum rolling, it was too late. The Browns scored the go-ahead late, and the Steelers got the ball back and were unable to score again. But ultimately, I look at that messy first half ultimately did the Steelers in that Thursday night contest against the Browns, because if you take any of those 3 drives, the sack fumble or the 2 turnover on downs drives, if the Steelers get down the field and score a touchdown on one of those drives, they possibly win that game. Now, granted, the Browns didn't really do much with those opportunities off those 3 drives, but still, anything goes differently in that first half on any of those drives, it could have completely changed the outcome of the game. So I do partially blame that, though. Some sloppiness in the first half. And you saw the Steelers, you didn't really get any big plays in the deep pass game from Wilson. It was a lot of shorter passes. And obviously the snow played a big factor in that. It's hard to throw deep balls down in the snow where, the field conditions are slippery. It can be hard to see sometimes in the snow. So you're not going to get you're not really going to get like Hail Marys or those type of plays in the snow. That's understandable, but the Steelers were not prepared, obviously weren't prepared for the weather, and it caught the best of them. But the ironic part is now the Cleveland Browns, 2 of their 3 wins are against top teams in the AFC. It's their 2 top division rivals, the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Baltimore Ravens. So even though the Browns are a dumpster fire and full-blown rebuild, they've beaten both the Steelers and the Ravens. So at least the Browns fans can at least hold some pride in saying, hey, we beat two of our division rivals and at least once. But for the Steelers, it's a sloppy game. Now, the question I have for here is for you guys. Are the Steelers coming crashing back down to reality? Because they were looking like contenders. They were early on because they were building winning games, even beating the Ravens. Steelers were looking like contenders there for a bit. Even last week we talked about saying, are the Steelers potentially dark horse contenders? But now you got to wonder, is this loss the start of a crash where the Steelers don't necessarily miss the playoffs, but maybe they lose a few more games late down the line. Maybe they lose the rematch to the Ravens. Maybe the Eagles get them. They drop to 5 losses and then they end up dropping to, say, the 5 seed or something along those lines. Is this the possible start of that for the Steelers down the line? I think there is a possibility that could happen now, that maybe they still make the playoffs. They still, they're still in the mix, but they might lose a few more games down the line. And even with Russell Wilson playing better than he did in Denver, let's face it, he's not the same Russ he was in Seattle. And I think you're going to see that come back to bite the Steelers a little bit more down the line. Even though he's got better structure with him than with Coach Tomlin, because you saw with Russell Wilson in Denver, there's 2 seasons he was there. He wasn't put in favorable situations with coaching. He had Nathaniel Hackett, a terrible play caller. Then last year with Sean Payton, Russell Wilson was not a Sean Payton type of quarterback. Let's face it. And that played a role in last season as well. Now he's with Mike Tomlin, who he works better with and he has better rapport with. But I still think Russell Wilson's not the same Russ he was in Seattle. And you'll start to see that catch the Steelers a little bit more down the line in some of these games against teams like the Eagles and the Ravens. I still see the Steelers making the playoffs, but I mean, they could maybe win the division, but I don't see them being like 14-3 or 13-4. I think they might drop at least two more games down the line. So are they crashing? Maybe a little, not crashing, but they're coming down a little bit. Like say they're flying high here, they're going to come down a little bit. That's kind of what I see with happening with the Steelers now. So I don't think this is necessarily a crash. However, we did see in the NFC, we saw another team that was looking like dark horse contenders start to crash, that being the Washington Commanders. So I feel this is the perfect segue into the next subject. The Washington Commanders now have dropped 3 straight games. Now, this one being, considering that they were playing a struggling Cowboys team, that's the ugliest of the 3. Now, the first 2 losses in that 3-game stretch, Steelers and Eagles, you could give them some benefit of the doubt. But, okay, going into those matchups, they were playing good teams. They lost a close one to the Steelers, but they still made it a competitive game. Well, I'll give them a pass for that. Then my team, the Eagles, beating them. I was hyped about it, but I still figured, okay, the Commanders still got something going. You figured the Cowboys would be the game. They get back on track, get that 8th win, improve to 8-4, but that didn't happen. And yes, we did have a missed kick that played a role in that game, but also Jaden Daniels looked a little more human in this one, so to say. He didn't look like the same monster rookie that he was. He did make some mistakes out there. He threw an interception. Now, granted, the Commanders did start to rally late in the game and come back, but they played sloppy through most of the game, and that cost them against a struggling Cowboys team starting their backup, Cooper Rush. And I think, honestly, this says more about the Commanders than it does the Cowboys at this point. And as far as the Cowboys go, I don't see them making a big miraculous turnaround. Sure, I do think the Cowboys will win some games down the line, but they're not doing this big turnaround making the playoffs. For the Commanders, you got to wonder what's going on. You know what's funny? One of my work buddies, you guys know, it's the same work buddy I always point to in these videos. You know, if you see my live streams, I always point to one work buddy of mine. It's the same guy, but he called it the Cliff Kingsbury effect because he's a Cardinals fan now that Kingsbury's a coordinator for the Commanders. He's pointing to the Kingsbury effect where the Cardinals would start off hot with him and then collapse later in the season like they did in 2020 where they were looking like a dark horse to make the playoffs. Then they finished 8-8. And then in 2021, they were looking like they could get home field only to clinch the wild card berth and fall to the not to the Rams, excuse me. And for the Commanders, at this point now, it's like I'm looking at the remainder of their schedule. They got the Titans on December 1st, but remember, we thought the Texans would easily beat the Titans, and we saw what happened there. I'll get into that next. So there's no guarantee that the Commanders could beat the Titans, even though they should. Even though I do think that Titans win against the Texans was a fluke, the point being is based off what happened between the Titans and Texans, you never know. There is a shot at an upset, but even then, that should be a win. I think that Titans win over the Texans was a fluke, which I'll get to in a second. Then they got the Saints on the 15th. That should be a win. They should at least be 9-5, win 2 straight. Sorry about that, guys. But then after that, you got the Eagles rematch. That's not looking too favorable right now. Falcons looking a little more favorable. But after, then you got the Cowboys on January 5th. And the Commanders on paper should still win enough games to at least get a wild card spot. But based on the way they played this last 3, I don't think they're a contender in the NFC anymore. I feel like they've kind of crashed down a little bit. It's like, okay, you guys got a much better team than you did. I still think you're playoff contenders, but I don't think you're quite ready to contend yet. I mean, maybe they could pull off an upset in the wild card round, but then I feel like the divisional round, they're probably going to lose. I think at this point, Commanders' ceiling is a wild card spot divisional round, because now what's happened is with Jayden Daniels, now that teams have they've scouted them. Now they kind of picked up on Jayden Daniels' style, his strengths, his weaknesses, and that's why you started to see him make a few more mistakes recently. So that's playing a big factor. Now Jayden Daniels has reached that point of, now that scouts have started to pick up on your style, how do you adjust? And that's the biggest thing for a rookie, because once you get to that point where scouts pick up on your style, it's not as easy to dominate. You have to find ways to adjust. And that's the thing that all quarterbacks got to go through. And I feel like now Jayden Daniels, teams are starting to pick up on him a little bit more. Defensive scouts know his strengths and weaknesses. And now it's a little bit tougher for him to adjust. So we're going to have to see from here what the Commanders do to adjust, because now it's not as easy as it was earlier on in the season. So, I mean, I'm not saying that Jayden Daniels is done. I'm just saying that, he's going to have to make some changes to keep the momentum he built up throughout the season going. That's all I'm saying. But for the Commanders, it's looking more like wild cards their ceiling now. They're going to have to find ways to regroup and rally and get things together. Maybe they did call some players meeting or something, or a team meeting to try to rally the troops and go over the game plans going forward. But that is what it is. But for the Commanders, they're going to have to make adjustments from here is the big thing. And speaking of teams that are struggling now, the Houston Texans. Now, they started off the season hot, but now you've sold the 7-5 and you lost to the Tennessee Titans. That's a bad loss right there. I feel like that's more embarrassing than the Commanders losing the Cowboys, because the Titans are in contention for the Tank Bowl. And the biggest thing is in this one, CJ Stroud's starting to regress. You can look at the stat line. I know stats don't always tell the whole story, but in this case, they do tell a story as to what's happening. He's thrown 9 interceptions so far, but he only threw 5 in 15 games last year. That's one of the telling stats right there. CJ Stroud's making more mistakes this season than he did last year. And it ties into what I said about Daniels now, but with CJ Stroud having played 15 games last year, this year scouts have had more time to pick up on his style. They had a whole offseason to scout him. Now that they scouted him, he's more mistake prone. Teams have figured out his strengths and weaknesses. Defensive lines, secondaries, defensive coordinators, all the position coaches have started to figure him out a little bit more, and they have a better blueprint on how to play against CJ Stroud. And now you're starting to see him throw more interceptions as a result. So CJ Stroud's got some adjusting to do as well. I mean, he hasn't been playing terrible at all. he's not playing like trash, but he's not playing up to the standard he did last season. So he has some adjustments to do as well. And the Texans as a team. And you got to remember, though, too, last year they had an easy schedule last year. And when you have a rookie coach and a rookie quarterback, it's easy to catch teams by surprise. Now, this year you're going into a season where you got a quarterback that teams are taking serious. You brought in Stephon Diggs, but he's no longer serviceable. You have Joe Mixon. People take the Texans more serious now. They play up to them as opposed to last year. And the Texans are starting to struggle a little bit. But particularly against the Titans, that's an embarrassing loss. Right there, CJ Stroud throwing 2 picks. He's got to learn to get it. He's got to make adjustments here because he's making too many mistakes with the ball. While he hasn't been playing terrible, it's obvious he's making costly mistakes, and that's caused him to lose some of these games in close fashion. So obviously, some adjustments need to be made. And for the Texans from here, even the good news for them is they're still in a tanking division, but they still have some work to do. I'm going to look at their schedule. They got the Jaguars. That should be a win. But remember last time they played them close. Then you got the Dolphins on the 15th. Now, I know the Dolphins in December usually struggle with colder weather, but over there at Reliance Stadium, it's not going to be the cold weather that usually jinxes the Dolphins. So that might, as long as, Tua's healthy, that could be a bit of a challenge. Then you got Kansas City on the 21st, who despite their ugly play, still win games. Then you got the Ravens on Christmas Day. And then the Texans got the Titans to close the season. That's going to be a bit of a tougher schedule there with the Dolphins. As long as they're healthy, could make that a game. Kansas City and the Ravens. Those are you're talking potentially a 2-3 stretch down the line to close and possibly finishing 9-8, which maybe still be good enough to win the division, but that could get you possibly the 4th seed in an opening round exit to either the Ravens or the Steelers in the wild card is how things are looking right now. So for the Texans, we're going to have to keep an eye on them to see how they do, see what DeMeco Ryans does to adjust to the situation going forward. So it's going to be an uphill battle for the Texans. And I feel these next couple of weeks will test how far this team has really come along once they face adversity. And now that we're switching gears, we're going from teams that has some potential that are struggling to a team that's just completely imploded. That being the New York Giants. With the previous 2 teams, they've struggled, but at least they still have some promise. This team, the Giants, they're in a complete full-blown rebuild. They released Daniel Jones. First, they benched him because they didn't want the risk of him getting hurt, and they'd have to still pay him on that contract. And then, once he asked for his release, the Giants are just like, you know what, let's just give it to him. He's not going, we're going to have a lot of luck looking for a trade partner for him. So if we just release him, take the hit, move on, we'll deal with that part of it. But they just wanted to get him out of there once he asked for the release because they're like, it's better for both sides, especially knowing his trade value was low. And then they fall to the Buccaneers, which at this point for the Giants isn't really a big deal because they're already at the bottom of the seat, looking forward to the future anyway. But, it shows the show. The way they lost 30-7 to a team that's lost 4 straight goes to show you they got nothing going for now. They're going to have to do a long rebuild for the future. And then Coach DeBall. Oh my gosh. Let's just talk about him for a minute because he's one of the biggest factors of this Giants free fall. He came in, let's just go start reiterating. He came back 2022, took over a Giants team with no expectations, helped lead him to the number 6 seed in an upset win against the Minnesota Vikings on the road. So let's give him props on that right there. That was a nice start to his first year. And we went into last year thinking the Giants had some potential. Saquon was back. Daniel Jones was off a decent year. Brian DeBall was looking like he was going to be the coach of the future. And I remember a lot of people predicted the Giants were going to go somewhere. Maybe you thought that Brian DeBall being the coach was finally the answer to helping Daniel Jones unleash his potential. And then last season happened. We saw that wasn't the case. The team, they didn't just take a step back last year. They regressed. I mean, I'll put it this way. You go from 9 wins to 7 wins. That's taking a step back. The Giants did not just take a step back. They fell right back to being one of the bottom teams like they were during the Joe Judge, Pat Shurmur, Pat McAfee years. That's what happened there. And now this year, they're a complete dumpster fire, losing to the Panthers, getting blown out by the Buccaneers, who are a better team than the Panthers, but still getting absolutely blown out by a struggling Buccaneers team. Barely beating the Cleveland Browns. Barely. Getting decimated by my team, the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, you could see the writing that this team, they're pretty much done. Brian Daboll, I don't know what they're doing. Are they going to give him till the end of the season, then fire him? Because clearly, he's just a one-year wonder as a coach. He had that 1 year where he came in. Nobody had any expectations. He was able to catch the league by surprise, help lead the Giants to some wins. But then when there were some expectations going for him, the ball faltered. He showed that he really didn't know what he was doing as a coach. Yeah, he was able to catch teams by surprise with no expectations. But once people were talking about the Giants potentially taking the next step, that pressure got to him, and he hasn't been able to do anything since. So I think he's definitely got to be on the hot seat. But you got to also start looking at the Giants front office too, because these are the guys that keep hiring all these different coaches. They hired years back. They hired Ben McAdoo. Flop. One fluke year to the playoffs. Then the next year was so bad they got rid of him. Pat Shurmur didn't pan out. Joe Judge tried once again. Giants learning nothing from all the Belichick assistants, such as the Manginis, the Crennels, the Josh McDanielses, the Matt Patricias. They tried to go for Joe Judge, and similar results happened with Judge as it did with Patricia, McDaniels, Mangini, so on and so forth. And then you brought in Brian Daboll. You had that one good year, but now he's looking just like Joe Judge and Pat Shurmur. It's almost as if that one good season never happened. So the Giants, all the point I'm getting is they got to look in the front office too and reevaluate the way they're going about hiring coaches, how they process interviews, what they're taking into consideration. Because if you're continuing to hire these coaches that produce terrible results, somebody is making poor evaluations in the interviews. Somebody's not making good assessments, or somebody's asking the wrong questions. Whoever the interviewer is, something's going wrong. They obviously need to make some adjustments there. You're not. And for the Giants, that's obviously a major adjustment they need to make. But that's a whole nother discussion for another time. The point is, Giants are a dumpster fire. They can forget about it. Start looking forward to the future. And now I'm going to switch gears to the NFC West a little bit. The Seattle Seahawks are out in first place in the NFC West in a relatively open division. As far as that goes, I mean, it's still an open division. I feel at this point, it's kind of tough to say because on paper, it looks like the Seahawks and Cardinals are the two best teams. And the Cardinals, Seahawks got the best of the Cardinals in this game, but the Cardinals still have a relatively easy schedule down the line. They'll still win some games, probably get up to 8 or 9 wins. Seahawks, at least, we know with Geno Smith, he's not a superstar quarterback, but he's got the right guys around him in Seattle to at least make something of it. And the Rams, even though they're fresh off my team, the Philadelphia Eagles, giving them a whooping, we know the Rams and Coach McVay know how to rally under pressure. They did it last year. They sound away into the playoffs. They could do it again this year. So at this point, I feel it's a 3-way race between the Seahawks, Cardinals, and Rams to possibly win that division. Now, as of now, the Seahawks have control by default. They won out. Rams lost to my team, the Eagles. 49ers got destroyed by the Packers. And at this point, it's looking pretty open. Now, for the Seahawks, though, to me, I think that division, whoever wins that division is facing a first-round exit, and regardless, against either the Vikings or the Packers. probably the winner of that division's going down against one of those two teams. I feel like at this point, whether it be the Seahawks, Cardinals, or even possibly the Rams, it's a first round exit. Now, for the Seahawks themselves, they still have some good talent around them. They still have a lot of young pieces on their defense. Yeah, they still have some good talent on the offensive side of the ball, but they're really looking like a relatively mediocre team thus far. They're 6-5, but kind of looking at it right now, they've found ways. Sure, they've won. I mean, to be fair, they've rallied and won their last two against division rivals. And they do have the Jets on Sunday, which should be an easy game. That should boom up to 7-5. But then you got the Cardinals again in Arizona. Who knows how that's going to go? Then they play the Packers and then the Vikings late in the season. Those don't look like such easy matchups now. And for the Seahawks, I think, and they probably do have the talent to possibly win out the division, but they're also going to need some help as well. You still got Kenneth Walker III, who's a decent back, but Kenneth Walker III's okay, but he's not really the answer at running back to really boost that running game. I mean, he's okay at times. I mean, you still got DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, two of the best weapons on offense. They can still get things done in the passing game, but I mean, the Seahawks, I could see them possibly winning out the Rams. Maybe the Rams, they know how to rally under pressure. They still got two of the best receivers in the NFL, and they still got a veteran quarterback in Matthew Stafford. While I don't think he's elite, he's still a good quarterback and still has the experience to know how to win games down the stretch. The Rams and Coach McVay, he has 2 Super Bowl appearances and a Super Bowl win under his belt, and only one losing season his entire tenure with the Rams since 2017. Coach McVay can know how to rally this team and get them possibly to win out in the division. So I still think, even though Seattle has the lead for now, I do think that the Rams, based on experience in these situations, maybe they have a shot of winning out and catching everyone by surprise, even though they're not the favorites at the moment. The Cardinals, off of the easier schedule, they still have Kyler Murray, one of the better quarterbacks in the league. Say what you want about him. Sure, Kyler's not an elite quarterback, but he's still one of the better quarterbacks. He's still a talented player. So even though the Seahawks are in first now, I think they're the weakest link out of the 3 potential winners of the division by default. But we'll see what happens. Maybe the Seahawks could prove me wrong as time goes along, but I feel like as of now, I think the Rams, based on experience overcoming adversity, are most likely going to win out in the division. But that remains to be seen. This take could age poorly. Time will tell on that one. But something else I want to talk about too. The Kansas City Chiefs beating the Carolina Panthers. I mean, I don't know, man. Yeah, they won. The difference between the Chiefs and the Eagles of last year, even though there's kind of similar vibes to the two in terms of their winning games, they got strong records, but, they weren't playing great. Difference between last year's Eagles and this year's Kansas City Chiefs are Kansas City has 3 Super Bowl wins, 4 Super Bowl appearances in the Patrick Mahomes era. You cannot count that team out. You still got to give them some benefit of the doubt. Whereas I know it's looking similar to my team last year and that epic collapse that came after a 10-1 start. I know it kind of seems like that with KC, but again, this is a team that has won multiple Super Bowls. They won a Super Bowl last year when there were doubts going into the playoffs. So I'm not going to count Kansas City out. Even though they could crash and lose some games late in the season, the bottom line is they're finding ways to win games, and they're still one of the favorites. You can't bet against these guys based on history. Even though it looks ugly, as of right now, I would say I kind of agree with what Stephen A. Smith said earlier this morning. As of today, November 26th, they're a top 5 team, but not a top 3 based on the fact they've had a lot of nail-biter wins at the moment. So it's like Kansas City, they're kind of looking like there's flaws to it, but at the same time, this is a team that's won 3 Super Bowls, so I can't count them out. I'm going to have to wait and see. We're going to really wait till the playoffs to see where Kansas City really stands this year. That's all I'm going to say about it. But moving on, speaking of the AFC, let's close this thing out. Let's talk about last night, because last night, wait, before we get there, let's talk about the NFC North a little bit. NFC North, you have the Detroit Lions. Yeah, they're doing their thing. They're looking like the contenders in the NFC. They became the odds-on favorite to win the Super Bowl last week after their shellacking of the Jaguars. And the Lions come back, get another win, and then you got the Minnesota Vikings win in overtime against the Bears. They almost let the Bears off the hook, as a former head coach of them once said, "We are who we thought they were, and we let them off the hook." It almost happened again. But the Vikings found a way to rally down the field, 90-yard drive in overtime to set up a game-winning field goal. Vikings get the win. Then the Packers, behind Josh Jacobs, had an excellent game against the battered 49ers team, but Josh Jacobs did his thing to help out. And that's what worked in their favor. So that is still a good division, folks. Now, the Raiders, letting Josh Jacobs go, I'll say this, was a huge mistake. Because even last year, when they didn't have the best team, when they fired McDaniels and Pierce was able to rally the troops, they still had a semblance of a run game with Jacobs. But now they don't have that run game. The Raiders got nothing going for them. And the Packers, all of a sudden, who were 9-8 last year, have one of the best records in the NFC. And they're in a dog race with the Vikings and Lions for that division. And now all it took for them was an upgrade at the running back position. And then that goes to show you how valuable Josh Jacobs has been, how big a pickup he was. He was somewhat of a game changer for the Packers. Now, do I think the Packers are contenders? No, but hey, Josh Jacobs has helped make them a better team. At least gives them a good shot at possibly winning a game or two come playoff time. And he could be a valuable asset for the future. And now we're going to move on, talk about Monday night, the Harbaugh Bowl. You have, I know a lot of people were looking forward to this one. And sure enough, it did deliver up to the expectations. The NFL, usually that Monday before Thanksgiving, they usually have a good matchup for us, or a matchup that looks like it's a good one on paper. This year's did deliver. Ravens beat the Chargers 30-23 in what was a back and forth game. And at this point for Lamar Jackson, remember early on when people were saying he was a running back? I remember it. We were all talking, even that MVP season he had, he showed some flashes in the passing game, but most of his highlights were runs during that first MVP back in 2019. As the years have gone along, we've actually seen Lamar improve as a passer and become one of, an excellent dual threat quarterback. And now he's had 2 regular season MVPs under his belt. Only thing missing is a Super Bowl win. And at this point, he is, say what you want to say, but he's one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. Can't take that away from him. And last night, he had a good performance for himself. 2 passing touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown. He really, he helped do what he needed to do. And for the Chargers, the biggest mistake they made during the offseason was trying to give J.K. Dobbins that type of, a big deal. Now, granted, J.K. Dobbins, ironically, the former Raven, he was healthy, he was good when healthy, but he has an injury history. He missed time during his first couple of years with the Ravens due to injuries, and he got injured last night and left the game, and that changed the whole trajectory of the game because that first half when they were running the ball effectively with J.K., they were scoring most of their points in that first half. They took that 10-0 lead early. J.K. Dobbins was a contributing factor to it, but then once he got injured that second half, the Chargers weren't able to move the ball and score points as effectively without J.K. in the running game. And you got the other former Ravens running back, Gus Edwards. He was awful. The Ravens had his number. And Justin Herbert did his best he could. But part of the problem with that for the Chargers is at the moment, you don't really have a lot of wide receivers. You don't have reliable options that Herbert can throw the ball to. And I felt not going for a wide receiver in the draft was a bit of a mistake. And I feel like last night, without J.K. Dobbins leading the way in the run game, you saw that lack of wide receiver depth come back to haunt the Chargers. While the Chargers don't get me wrong, the Chargers are still a good team. Jim has done a nice job turning that team around. But I don't feel they're contenders yet because they struggle to beat teams like the Steelers and the Ravens. And they don't really have any real wide receivers. In an era where passing is one of the main components, is the most important component on offense in today's era, you don't really have any big wide receivers to help bolster the passing game. That's going to come back to bite them as far as being contenders. Now, don't get me wrong. The Chargers are a good team. They're much better off with Jim Harbaugh than they were with Brandon Staley. Don't get me wrong. And I give Jim Harbaugh credit for doing a nice turnaround with that Chargers team. However, I feel like in big game situations, I don't think the Chargers are ready to contend yet. And we saw last night, they put up a good fight, but ultimately the Ravens were the better team and had their number. And so, yeah, it's a nice turnaround for the Chargers. They've become a good team, but like I said, I think the Ravens, I don't know if the Ravens are quite contenders yet. I feel like with the Ravens, this will be a big test this upcoming Sunday against my team, the Eagles. That's going to be the test to determining if this team has what it takes. And I think that's going to be a big test right there. And then we'll have to ultimately wait and see. But hey, right now, though, the Ravens, they move up the ranks in the AFC. They get a big win against one of the top teams. For the Baltimore Ravens, things are looking upward. But I feel like we've been down this road before. We've seen the Ravens are in good position. But at the same time, you got to factor in they got those losses to the Browns and Raiders, which is the one thing that makes me hesitant to call the Ravens contenders at this point. And while they are a good team and they're one of the top teams in the AFC, I still don't know. I'm not sold on them being contenders. Like I said, you dropped one to the Browns. You blew a lead against the Raiders. Granted, that was week 2 and that was early in the season. But you have that. And then you did lose, mind you, to the Steelers. So I'm not quite sold on them being contenders. Not to take credit away from them. This was a good win. Good win for the Ravens. And excellent for John. He gets the bragging rights over brother Jim for the 3rd time. And heck, shout out to Lamar Jackson. He did his thing. He had himself an excellent game. But I want to see how the Ravens go from here. And for the Chargers, same go as well. This was a good matchup. Good game from both teams. Now I want to see where they go from here. I'm going to close this out like I normally do. And we're going to bring the 2-minute recap back. I'm going to do that real quickly. Bring back that 2-minute recap. We just briefly talk for 2 minutes. And I'm going to go over some of the other headlines that went on across the league that I didn't get the opportunity to discuss yet. That we'll just real quickly knock out in 2 minutes. 49ers falling without. 49ers obviously have been hit by the Super Bowl hangover. Let's face it. It's self-explanatory. Injuries. Brock Purdy looks more mortal. You're starting to see him come crashing down a little bit. And you're realizing maybe he really was the system quarterback after all. He wasn't really this special quarterback. And now you're kind of starting to see that play out with the Niners, man. That Super Bowl losers curse is no joke, man. Let me tell you. So we'll end with that about the 49ers. Now, moving on, we're going to talk about, like I said, the NFC North. Like we said, that's a hell of a division. Dolphins. Now, the Dolphins, some people think the Dolphins may, because I've been hearing talk in sports media about the Dolphins. Are they going to rally? Are they going to come back? Here's my thing. The Dolphins have a habit of choking in December. Once the weather gets cold and they have to play at colder stadiums, their performance starts to go down with the weather. The Dolphins who are used to playing home in warm weather, they struggle to adjust in cold weather conditions. And I feel as though you're going to see the same situation happen with them again come December. So even though, yes, we know from they had that 2021 run, they rallied, and with their guys healthy, they have a shot, but I'm not sure if they're going to quite rally. But we'll see. But yeah, that's all I got for you guys today's show. Guys, thanks for stopping by and tuning in. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this stream. Whether you caught it for most of the show, part of it, whatever the case may be, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you guys for stopping by and tuning in. If you haven't done so, drop a like and subscribe to whatever channels you watch on the Nicky Stees channel, Hardcore Sports Network, the case may be. Before I go, share the links to both channels. So if you're not subscribed, you know where to go to hit that subscribe button. There's a link for my channel. And we're going to get the link to the Hardcore Sports Network as well. So we got to make sure if you haven't done so, you sub that up as well. Hardcore Sports Network features all types of sports content from different content creators. From, well, Nicky Stees himself, Mitch Koski, Blaze Radio, so many others. We all talk about different subjects on the network. We talk about football, basketball, hockey, boxing. Anyone, even if you are interested in pro wrestling, there's some talk about that as well. If you're a fan, we talk all the sports, even the predetermined ones. But yes, folks, there's the link to the Hardcore Sports Network for all types of sports, live shows about different sports, football, basketball, hockey, baseball, you name it. So with that being said, enjoy the rest of your day. Until tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll do episode 99 of the Pick and Roll podcast, talking NBA basketball, which I'll be featuring on my channel, the network, along with Mitch Koski, Blaze Radio, Rios from Just Fans Podcast. It's your boy Nicky Stees signing off. Catch you next time.